Hello everybody and welcome back to my workshop. If you're a fan of my channel, you have seen me use this table saw countless times. It's an old Craftsman, I think from the 1950s or 60s, and it's built like a tank and will certainly outlast me and probably my children and grandchildren. And like all other table saws, it needs to be maintained and tuned up and checked for accuracy, etc. However, it's not perfect. It has its limitations. One of the biggest limitations is I only have about 19 inches of rip capacity to the right of the blade and a little bit less than that to the left of the blade. I actually like this rip fence. It's accurate enough and it has this rack and pinion feature in it which gives you some level of adjustability. Of course you can always tap it like most people do. But despite that, one of the solutions I've thought about was going out and buying a much fancier and larger capacity rip fence, but those things typically cost hundreds of dollars. Another solution I'm considering is I could go out and buy another extension wing, which they're reasonably available, not terribly expensive, around $100, which is okay. But this piece here, the rack and pinion rail for the fence, these are relatively rare and fairly expensive when you can find them. It's typically, again, on the order of $100 or more. So it's a pretty fair outlay of cash for something that I don't really need. And I've also noticed lately, especially in a troubled economy, that you can find used table saws and some awfully nice ones for not a lot of money, especially considering what these things might have sold for when they were new. And you know, given all that, it doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense to spend too much money on this guy. For me to handle sheet goods, I have an assortment of straight edge type of jigs that I can use with my circular saw. And that works pretty well, but to be totally frank, it's not a cut that I look forward to doing. It's fairly setup intensive, and my workshop just really isn't big enough to put together some sort of panel cutting system. And every now and then I have a piece of stock around this big that's big enough to comfortably handle on the table saw, but I just don't have the rip fence capacity to handle it. So I came up with this idea for a table saw extension, and it fits just outside the tabletop surface of my table saw, and it allows me to go out beyond the fence. Let me give a 90-second build sequence. Hunting around for scraps in my shop, I found these two lengths of birch veneered plywood from previous projects, and I think they're going to make great candidates for what I need because they're light. And this edge here, very straight, which is what I'm looking for. First thing I'm going to do is glue these two pieces together. They don't have to be very perfect, but I do want this edge to be straight, and I'm going to try to get it square and flat, but those are actually less important. The extension wing is pretty square to the cast iron top of the table saw, which is no great surprise. I have this bar in place, and I'm going to use the extension wing as a guide to line these pieces up, and I will take one of these and glue it on the underside in place, and that will at least align the inner two blocks. Then I'll be able to attach the outer two. And these two pieces that I glued in are measuring dead nut square. It's no great surprise. Doesn't seem to be any play. Here it is assembled. I used 1/2-inch square steel tubing for strength without adding too much weight. Conveniently, these fit on the table saw between the table and the fence guide. During a cut, the table saw itself will be supporting the weight of the piece as I push it through, so these don't have to be terribly strong. They really just have to be strong enough to support the fence. So I glued these blocks as I showed you. I decided to screw these ones just in case I need to make adjustments in the future. And I laminated these pieces with a piece of steel on either side because I worry with time this joint is going to loosen up and this whole thing is going to rack as I try to position it in place. So I wanted this to be light and rigid and stable. I think these steel blocks will help prevent the plywood from crushing and compressing and distorting with time. So here it is set up for 31 inches. and it seems to go into place fairly square. I built these riser blocks that I can put on my air scrubber to support the extreme right hand side where the fence is sitting, and it seems to line up pretty square to the table saw, and I think this will be a slightly more convenient way to cut certain size pieces of stock. And another reason why I built it this way is this is kind of big, gangly, and somewhat fragile, but it can be knocked down for storage and assembled in just a couple minutes. Well, that's all I got for this one. I thought it was an interesting idea, and I realized that the solution is probably only good for a saw just like mine, but perhaps if you're watching this video, it gave you some ideas on how to come up with a solution for your table saw. Thanks for stopping by, and like and subscribe if you would, if you liked it. And as always, keep an eye out for the next one.